Barbarian is a movie released in 2022 directed by comedian turned horror director Zach Cregger. The movie is equally funny and scary with some hard turns and prominent social commentary on gender biases. But in today's video, we'll be looking into the main villain of the film, the mother. But who is this giant deformed lady obsessed with having a baby and pretty much down to kill whoever hurts her babies? Well, let's find out together in this video. And before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us it means an awful lot. Thank you very much. Now let's begin. Tess meets the mother. The movie starts off quite straightforward. You have Tess Marshall, played by the beautiful Georgina Campbell. She's in her own car on a dark and stormy night with the winds howling, like literally howling. Obviously, this is not the weather anyone should be out in the dark in. Luckily for Tess, she finally finds the house she's been looking for, house number 426 of Barbary Street, Detroit. It's an Airbnb she's booked for the night before her interview. Tess hurries to the lockbox, punches in the code mentioned in the email, and what do you know? There's no key in the damn lockbox, so she's locked outside. Well, no, actually it gets worse. As Tess is frustrated about being locked out in the dark and is taking that frustration out on the house, a light is turned on from the inside, and from what she could see, it looked like there was a man inside the house. This is a fella named Keith, played by the surreal Bill Skarsgård, and he opens the door. He explains that he too had booked the place for the night, but as Tess and Keith used two separate apps for the booking, it led to confusion. Tess is obviously frustrated, and she doesn't really want to go inside. She tries calling the person who leased out the place, but understandably they're not picking up because it's 2 AM, and with no other option, Tess decides to just leave. But right before she could just go, Keith calls out to her and asks her to come inside for the night, as there would be a roof over her head and a lock upon the door. The neighbourhood they were in was not safe by the looks of things, so Tess hesitantly but finally came inside and asks Keith to pull up his reservation details so she could confirm that all of this was really a misunderstanding. Keith didn't seem to grasp why the situation seemed so suspicious and unsafe from her perspective, but then again, when do men ever? Keith pulls up his reservation and Tess is slightly relieved. Not too much, however, because obviously now she's in this random roommate situation with a total stranger. Tess even tries to check if she could book another room at a hotel nearby, but there was a doctor's convention happening in town, so everything was all booked up. So Keith, being the gentleman he was trying to be, offers Tess the bedroom so that she could sleep peacefully, knowing that she's locked in and safe. Keith has quite the urbane tendencies, however. He brews Tess a cup of tea and insists that she takes the bedroom. Obviously, Tess is not stupid, so she doesn't drink the tea. Given that Keith's behaviour is right in the middle of an awkward and threatening situation, Tess just never knows whether she can trust him or not, and that is such a suspenseful thing to watch play out on the big screen. As Tess is a bit of a germaphobe, she insists on washing the sheets that Keith was obviously using, and while the laundry is running, Keith offers Tess some wine. Keith insists that he didn't open the bottle until Tess was here because otherwise she might not want to have any. Even though at first we see Tess decline the offer, we later see the two of them bonding on the couch over some wine and the documentary filmmaker that Tess is supposed to see the next day. This leads to the both of them bonding quite a bit, and it's evident that there's chemistry between the two. Seeing Keith flail around with the duvet cover on his head and seeing Tess laugh with him over his goofy and slightly wine-drunk behaviour is quite sweet. Finally, once the duvet was fixed and without any folds, Keith bids Tess goodnight and retires to the living room for the evening. Tess is seen smiling, clearly having a soft corner for the guy who she initially assumed to be a threat. At night, like in most haunted houses, Tess's bedroom door opens with a telltale screech. This woke her up and she thought it was Keith who had done this, but Keith was stuck in his own nightmare on the couch. When Tess got close to Keith and gave him a startling wake-up call, Keith confirmed that he did not in fact open the bedroom door. Tess, extremely apologetic for the intrusion, goes back to bed for the night after locking the door one more time. When she woke up in the morning, Tess is surprised to see the house empty, but then she finds that Keith had left her a note. As Keith is the founder of a local music group and has been on the lookout for new areas to work on, Tess didn't find it worrying anymore. She gets dressed, packs her bag and decides to drive to the next neighbourhood a little, where she goes for her interview. In the daylight, it becomes evident that the area that the B&B is in is extremely shady, and Keith wasn't bluffing when he mentioned that the night before. The interview that Tess was looking forward to ended up going quite well, but when the director heard where Tess was staying, she looked ashen. She warns Tess about the area and asks her to be careful. While on her way home, Tess Tess is chased by a homeless person who asks her to get out of the house, and that makes Tess feel extremely uneasy. Tess tries to contact the police, but they're of no help. When Tess tries to freshen herself up a little bit, she notices that there's no toilet paper. Bad roommate, Keith. Anyway, in search of some TP, Tess soon finds herself in the basement. And nothing bad ever happens in the basement, as we know, right? Right? Well, for starters, as she's grabbing the tissue, the basement door closes in on itself, locking her down there. She doesn't have her phone at all because she left it on the counter, and that's why you should never leave your phone anywhere else but your pocket. Take it with you at all times. To make matters worse, the main key to the house isn't in the lockbox, it's in her pocket, and that means that even if Keith were to come home, he wouldn't be able to enter the house. Tess notices a window in the basement, but she couldn't open it, so to kill time waiting for Keith to arrive, Tess starts wandering around the basement. She notices something odd about a certain wall, seeing a rope stick out of it. Curiosity gets the better of her and she starts to pull it, and do you know what? There's a convenient, totally non-creepy, totally not scary hidden door in the wall. Tess takes a hard look down a dark passage behind the hidden door, and like a smart girl, she goes, nope, and sat her ass back down on the stairs. While she was sitting down, she notices a mirror in the corner which could potentially act as a light source for her. So using that, she lit a pitch black passageway to a degree and decides to have a stroll down the corridor. Bad decision, because those types of passageways never have anything good about them. But stroll on she did. What did she find? Why, a rusty old bed, a camera pointed towards the bed, a waste bucket, and a very bloody handprint on the wall at the end of the passage. It's clear that some nefarious activities had been happening in this house, and Tess was not going to sit there and wait to find out what they were. Thankfully, right then, she hears Keith knocking on the door. She manages to get the key to Keith, and with a bit of help, she's finally freed from the basement. Tess has only one thing on her mind. She is going to go. She tries to tell Keith what had happened and why she was in haste, but Keith simply could not fathom the implication of a bucket and a bed being dangerous. So while Tess is trying to pack her bags and bounce, Keith tries to stop her. Eventually, he begs Tess just to give him a moment so he can go and see the hellhole for himself, and then both of them could leave together. Tess, who is clearly smitten by Keith, decides to wait, but after a few moments, she notices that she couldn't hear Keith or any of his movements. Worried about his well-being, Tess keeps the door of the basement open with a chair, and armed with her phone flashlight, made her way down into the passage of doom. And this is where she finds out that the basement had a deeper basement of its own. As she carefully made her way into the darkness, she came across a bunch of rusty cages with food bowls in them. Obviously, that's not a good sign, and Tess wants to go out, but Keith is nowhere to be found. When they finally see each other, Keith is hysterical. Someone is down there in the basement with them, and that someone bit him. As Tess tries to take Keith with her back the way she came, you know, the route that is guaranteed safe, Keith refuses. He's scared that whoever attacked him is on that path, and to evade the attacker, they need to go deeper into the cave. As they argue, the attacker shows up out of nowhere behind Keith and bashes his skull in a mushy goop with vicious thuds and sickening crunches. But before we get a good look at the attacker, the movie makes a drastic jump cut. We see a guy driving a convertible down a highway, and this is AJ Gilbride, played by the often nice guy Justin Long. He's a manic Hollywood producer who sexually assaulted one of his co-workers, so understandably he's kicked off his project, has to file financially draining lawsuits, gets abandoned by his financial advisor, and has no choice but to liquidate his properties. One of his many properties happens to be 426 Barbary Street, and AJ decides to check out the property before he sells it off. Seeing that the house still had the belongings of the previous tenants, Keith and Tess, AJ is none too happy. He calls the property manager and tries to have a conversation, but the exchange goes nowhere. Eventually, hearing a bang in the basement, AJ decides to venture down into uncharted territory armed with a flashlight and a paring knife. His descent down to the basement and his reaction to seeing the passage of doom are hilarious. In the first 30 minutes of the movie, there's a moment where Tess says that men can simply charge in without worrying and make a mess. So that point stands as true as we see AJ going backwards into the dark passage and the bedroom from hell, casually measuring it all out. He really is the embodiment of the free real estate guy. He came across the diaper room, which elicited quite a disgusted ooh from him. Covered in dirty rags with an outdated informative video about how to breastfeed a baby, this room is clearly not to AJ's taste. His happiness is eventually dampened when the measuring tape he's holding seemingly gets snatched from his hand. This puts him in a panicked, headless chicken mode and he begins to run. Eventually, in the darkness, he stumbles across a grotesque attacker and ends up captive in an underground jail. Before he could freak out about the predicament, his cellmate, who is none other than Tess, lunges towards him. Before we see what she has to tell him, the movie yet again takes us on a loop. The time goes back, and we're looking at the 426 Barbary Street house in the early 1980s. We see the owner of the Barbary house, Frank, going out to the supermarket for his pregnant wife. He doesn't have the midwife, and so the kind lady at the store helps him out with whatever he might need. As he gets out at the store, a woman in a yellow dress catches his eye. He stalks her all the way to her house, and eventually he dons a blue jumpsuit and poses as a maintenance worker to gain access to the home. Inside, he unlocks a window for later purposes and leaves for his house. As he enters the familiar basement, we hear the screaming of a woman, making it very clear that Richard Brake's character is a kidnapper and a rapist, the type of man that Tess was afraid that Keith was. Finally, we go back to Tess and AJ. Tess catches AJ up on the situation and tells him to remain calm. If he does not, then the attacker, aka the mother, the giant deformed lady, will go berserk. Their conversation was cut short when the mother shows up with some of her milk in a bottle. AJ refuses to drink from the bottle while Tess does so obediently. This results in the mother grabbing AJ, taking him to the room with the informative video and forcibly breastfeeding him. In a deleted scene, she even fed AJ a freshly killed rat, which is just horrifying. Seeing the mother was super busy with AJ, Tess manages to sneak out of her underground jail undetected. She was making good progress until she stepped on AJ's measuring tape, which made the mother aware of her escape attempt. Tess manages to run from the passage and break the window of the basement. Right when the mother is about to grab her, the homeless dude, who we now learn to be Andre, comes and pulls Tess away. This moment too serves to show just how nuanced the gender problems displayed in this movie are. Andre was never the bad guy. He wanted to save Tess, but he ran at her screaming "little girl" at the top of his lungs, and that obviously made Tess think that she was going to be attacked, obviously. As Andre tries to urge Tess to leave, Tess decides to stay. She had seen one man die in front of her. She wasn't going to let AJ meet the same fate. So she walks to the nearest gas station and calls the police. However, the police who showed up had no interest in helping her. Due to her haggard appearance, the police assume she's another crackhead and decide to just leave her alone. But Tess is unstoppable. She breaks another window and enters the house. She gets the keys to her car and waits for the mother to come out, as Andre said she would. Soon enough, the mother comes from the house, screeching at the top of her lungs as her perimeter of movement has increased in the darkness. Bringing the pedal to the metal, Tess manages to pin the mother against the house and makes her way downstairs to the basement looking for AJ. AJ, on the other hand, right after being force-fed milk, decided to go on his very own adventure. He went deeper into the cave system, following a rope and a bell, and surprisingly, even though the mother followed him, she didn't attack him as he stood against the door at the end of the rope. Realizing that there's something inside that scares her, AJ goes in. At first, the room looks just decrepit, littered with bottles and food wrappers, but soon AJ notices an old man lying on a bed. AJ is sympathetic to the old man and tries to help this non-verbal male. Eventually, AJ decides to focus on scavenging whatever he could find in the room. As he looks around, he notices there were several videotapes organized on a shelf. With his curiosity piqued, AJ pushed one of those video cassettes inside the player and watches the contents, which we, the audience, don't get to see. However, it's not secret what the contents are because the old man is of course Frank, and whatever we can hear, well, that's more than enough evidence to conclude that this man was sick and had been videotaping himself raping and beating up all those women. As AJ turns to face Frank and berate him for the crimes, Frank pulls out a gun. Instead of shooting AJ, Frank shoots himself in the head, making it very clear he has no intention of being held accountable for his crimes. With no other choice, AJ arms himself with the gun and begins to make his way out of the passage. Feeling like there was someone at the end of the passage, AJ takes a shot in the dark, managing to hit Tess. Feeling a bit guilty, AJ carries Tess from the house, and as they cross her car, the mother is nowhere to be seen. Fearing for their safety in the darkness, Tess and AJ go to the water tower where Andre lives. And this is where we learn what a horrible monster Frank truly is. He had been looking for a housewife for himself, so he would kidnap unsuspecting women, rape and torture them and impregnate them. Then he would repeat the cycle with the babies born out of the torture, leading to abominations like the mother. This conversation made AJ realize what a horrible person he is, because while he may not be out there kidnapping women, he did assault someone. Even if it was one time, there was a gravity of this situation and it finally sank in. As AJ and Tess wondered if they would truly be safe in the water tower, Andre reassures them, saying that in the past 15 years, the mother had never shown up there. However, of course, by saying this out loud, the man jinxed it all, because as soon as he was finished with this statement, the wall behind him crumbles and the mother crashes through. The mother puts him in a headlock of sorts and then rips off his arm. Then she proceeds to bludgeon him into a bloody pulp with his own ligament. As As everything is going down, AJ instantly abandons Tess, proving to all of us that he's not a good person despite that epiphany that he had. He climbs up the water tower swiftly, followed by Tess, who is bleeding profusely. He notices that the mother too was starting to climb, and in his haste to shoot, he has dropped the gun. In that moment, he looks at Tess, and a sick idea coming from a purely selfish desire to survive comes into his head. He grabs Tess's hair and he throws her off the tower the moment the mother had begun to climb up. Seeing her baby fall, the mother swan dived after her and somehow manages to break Tess's fall to earth, but they both lay unresponsive on the ground, making AJ go down in haste. He picks up the gun, and right as he checked upon the two women, he realized that Tess was still alive. Instead of being honest, this guy starts to gaslight her, saying that he didn't let her go, she was slipping and whatnot. Luckily, even before Tess could complain, the mother wakes up. She grabs onto AJ's face, digs her fingers into his skull, and splits his head in half, bringing an end to this Hollywood maniac. She turns towards her baby, Tess, who lays upon the street. The mother tries to bring her back home, but every time she goes to pick up Tess, Tess winces, worrying the mother. As the mother is trying to figure out what to do, Tess manages to get her hand on the gun. She brings it up to the mother's temple, who surprisingly seems to accept this without protest. She kisses her fingers and touches Tess's forehead, a very clear, affectionate gesture, and calls her baby one last time before Tess blows the mother's brains out. With that, this roller coaster of a movie comes to an end. The end credits roll as we watch Tess make her way out of Brightmoor, Detroit, as the sun rises once again. This movie had an amazing cast, and the way the storytelling grips you from the get-go is pretty inspirational. The first 42 minutes of the movie is all suspense because nobody knows if Keith is a threat or not, and I personally enjoyed that bit. While the naked horror lady trope is a bit of a cliche, I did enjoy the character of the mother. Speaking of which, let's talk about her. Who is the mother? What does she look like? In the movie Barbarian, there's actually quite a few monsters, while the main villain who our protagonists have to evade is the giant naked lady, aka the mother, played by Matthew Patrick Davis. I think we can all agree that there's more horrifying monsters, aka Frank. While she is a Goliath of a foe to go up against with a lot of brutality in her mannerisms, the mother's origin is quite tragic. The mother is one of many babies that Frank had created through inbreeding and kidnapping, leading to her grotesque visage and features. From the context given to us, we can assume that she has grown up in those human-sized cages that we saw Tess come across at one point, and that she had quite a few siblings, maybe even kids of her own, who were brutally killed by Frank, leaving her as the last standing. From a purely biological standpoint, it's a bit weird that the deformed child ended up being almost 7 feet tall, but I'm willing to ignore this because her height, I would say, just adds to her horrific element. Matthew Patrick Davis sat for 4 hours for a prosthetic face, breasts, and other body parts implanted to ensure that he could ham up his role as this creepy woman. However, the ass that you see on her is not fake at all. That's actually Matthew Patrick Davis's rear end. His own height of 6'8" makes him the perfect looming presence for the character of the mother, and that's what results in such an iconic horror villain. Why does she like children? We can't say quite just how old the mother is because of her features. What we can say is that despite her age, she's quite childlike in her behaviour, often cooing and babbling. It's obvious that she was kept in the dungeon where she was born, and nothing but that informative video on breastfeeding had kept her company. We can understand her from her behaviour that she sees Frank as a malevolent character, and why would she not? He's the sole protector that she's only ever known, but he's also the one who abused her and the other kids like her. We don't know if she was also assaulted by Frank, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. She grew up thinking that her only purpose was to be a mother, so it's evident she wants a baby of her own. That is why we see her kidnapping whoever she comes across, trying to keep them as her baby. If they're smart and pliable like Tess was, then the mother is shown to have a soft corner for the baby. If the baby doesn't listen and tends to resist her desires, the mother doesn't hesitate to force her will upon them and eventually murder them, in cases like AJ and Keith. Does she have feelings? Why didn't she kill Tess? Obviously, for every horror fan who saw this movie, seeing the mother show a soft corner for Tess was quite an emotional moment. A lot of fans found themselves choked up in the theatres during these last few seconds because despite her animalistic tendencies, she has something human about her. This could be because the mother is overprotective of Tess, as Tess was the only compliant baby out of the 3. The mother shows a sort of favoritism towards Tess, which, I mean, come on, we all know that mom moms have their favourite child. This special treatment could also stem from the fact that Frank is the only male model that Mother has known in her life, and obviously he's not the best. She's scared of him, not wanting to go near his room, which is clearly because of the trauma she has suffered at his hands. Also, given that Frank wanted to keep the cycle of incest and abuse going, he probably killed whichever male kids were born, leaving only females. So perhaps that is also why the mother is less forgiving towards men and more sympathetic towards the females. We can also see that the mother always tries to stop people she kidnapped from venturing deeper into the tunnel and eventually coming across Frank. While her efforts are definitely violent, they are efforts nonetheless, because Frank at the end of the day is the worst thing that lives in the house, not the mother. The way Tess treats the mother is also a huge reason why Mother is going to be so gentle with her. While all the male characters of the movie either demonize her, run away, or assault her, Tess is the only one who is sympathetic towards her. Tess recognized what the mother wanted and complied with her, which is why, despite how long she was held captive, Tess didn't suffer any injuries at the hand of the mother, who could easily bash somebody's skull in. In the last climactic scene, Tess shoots the mother, but it's not out of anger or despair, it's out of pity. She lets the mother know she won't go back into the house again, and Mother seems to accept this answer. Tess allows the mother to kiss her baby goodbye one last time before shooting her in the head, and I think that was the mother accepting her fate. Marvelous verdict. If you are a horror fan who doesn't mind getting whiplashed through a variety of emotions in the span of 1 hour and 42 minutes, then this movie is one for you to watch. Barbarian feels like 3 different films cut together into one, but in the best way possible. It begs its audience to understand the concepts of fear that all women go through on a day-to-day basis, which most men are oblivious to, and it shows this concept in a believable and understandable fashion. The writing of the film is stellar, with believable casts and understandable dilemmas, and I for one enjoyed it greatly. Plus, seeing AJ happily measuring a murder dungeon is the funniest thing you're gonna see all day, so you should definitely check this out. Let us know in the comments if you agree with our take on the mother, and we will catch you next time. And by the way, if you like our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't done so already. Otherwise, have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.